Alright guys, Bill, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video I'm back with another Survivor recasting video, and this is going to be kind of a start of a series, one that I didn't mention doing in the past, where I've done a casting video where I casted an all-star Brains vs. Beauty vs. Brawn season. However, I talked about in that video that no one on the cast ended up coming from before the original Brains vs. Beauty vs. Brawn, which made me think of this video where here I'll be recasting the actual season of Survivor Cagayan as if it was an all-star season, still using the Brains vs. Brawn vs. Beauty theme, though only having returning players. And I'll be honest, this was definitely a much more difficult task than I thought it was going to be, especially when trying to create this in a semi-realistic way, where considering how many people were in contention for my original list, I assumed that putting this group together would be extremely easy, though there still ended up being some kind of weird choices that had been made along the way, but again, we'll talk through it. But this video also will only be casting from seasons 1 through 27, so we're going through seasons one by one, talking about the contenders and the people that actually made the list. Now, straight up, no one ends up actually making the list from any season before Survivor Vanuatu, so I might as well just kind of breeze through these earlier seasons. From Survivor Borneo, I did consider Richard Hatch for the Brains tribe, though again, don't feel like he would have been put on. Kelly Wigglesworth also would have been consideration probably for the Brawn tribe, especially considering her later return on Second Chance, so I decided for this sort of season, not really sure if they had her top of mind. From Australian Outback, I did consider Varner, who obviously later returns for Second Chance, though again, did not make the cut here. Also considered Colby and Jerry, obviously two of the more iconic figures from this season, to where Colby probably would have been for the Brawn tribe, though also could have been Beauty, but did not put him on. And the same thing goes to Jerry, who probably would have been on Beauty, I guess, though neither of them were particularly close to making it. From Survivor Africa, I did consider Ethan Zahn, obviously the winner, though I think at this point he probably wouldn't have been in good enough health to come back, and even beyond that, did not quite squeeze on anyway. And then also I considered Kelly Goldsmith, who's one of these people who's supposedly in the running for a lot of these seasons, and she would have been a perfect fit for the Brains tribe, though she didn't really make the cut. Now, didn't really consider anyone from Recasting. Obviously, they would have won Boston Rob, but he obviously would have said no. Thailand, obviously, they just simply don't want anyone back from that season. So then we move on to the Amazon, where again, it's the same two people that would typically be talked about here. Again, Rob Cesternino would have been great for the Brains tribe, though I think he would have said no. While Jenna probably could have been on the Beauty tribe, though I don't feel like they would have gone with her in this position. Next, moving on to Pearl Islands, and Pearl Islands has a lot of contenders here. A big one here is Rupert, where for a while Rupert was actually on my cast. I did put him on the Brawn tribe. However, I decided to take him off largely because, one, this is again season 28, immediately after season 27, meaning that he would have already been cast on Blood vs. Water. And while we'll talk about this later, that a lot of 27 people do actually even make it onto this cast, despite how improbable it is, considering they obviously would have been cast around the same time, I did decide to leave Rupert off for other reasons beyond that, particularly diversity, and the fact that my initial grouping here was not particularly diverse group of people, and Rupert felt like the most expendable of those, especially considering he was just on. But then other contenders here are people like Sandra, who I don't know exactly where she would have landed, probably on the Brains tribe, again did not make the cut. Fair Play also would have probably been on the Brains tribe, but did not qualify. And one that was actually probably closer to making it on, surprisingly, was Andrew Savage, who obviously later returns for Second Chance, though I really did consider him for the Brains tribe. Again, I talked about this before when casting a Brains tribe, that it's very difficult to cast the Brains tribe with the same amount of physicality as a Brawn or a Beauty tribe, and through that I felt like Savage was this guy that again fits within the Brains tribe. He is this lawyer, this clear leader figure, but one that is also pretty decent in challenges, though again he ended up not qualifying for the list here. Now we're on to Vanuatu, where again I did put one person on the cast, though there were other considerations. Amy Cusick was someone that I considered for the Beauty tribe, being a former model, though she didn't make it on. One of the bigger cuts to me, and another person that was so close to making the list, was Eliza, who I really want to have on the Brains tribe, and coming into this list I fully expected her to be on, though again considering the time in Survivor history that this is, and that she had been pretty far removed since her last appearance, and also to add more diversity to the cast, I did end up having to cut Eliza. The person I did put on here on the Brawn tribe ends up being someone that again they had been wanting to bring back for a bit here, this person always being like an alternate, or at least in the running for a lot of returning seasons up to this point. However, I finally put her on. That person is Twyla, who again I think fits the Brawn tribe well enough. I mean, she's obviously a very hard worker at camp, and beyond that has a very blue collar style job, while also kind of helps balance out the Brawn tribe and not being this overtly physical figure. So I felt like Twyla was a solid pick in my mind. Next up for Palau, I did consider a couple people. Toby was a big one for the Beauty Tribe, as again, I did feel like the Beauty Tribe here in particular was probably the hardest one to cast. And I feel like his occupation fits into what we've typically seen from the Beauty Tribe in the actual seasons, though, again, I did not put him on. Also considered putting on someone like a Bobby John, who's another one of these like really hard workers at camp, though he didn't make it. Ian is someone I consider, though I just don't feel like he would have said yes. Though the person I did put on here is Stephanie LaGrossa, who is kind of the epitome of brawn from a women's side of things. While, again, I don't know how much of that is necessarily warranted. She did get a lot of credit as being this very strong woman on the show. Obviously gets hyped up as being the last one standing of her original tribe, and because that was looked at as this very brawny sort of player, and because I did end up landing her on the cast here. Next up for Guatemala, I did consider Danny Boatwright for the Beauty Tribe, obviously being a former pageant girl, though she didn't make it on. Though also kind of a more random pick here that I considered was someone like Amy O'Hara, who by this point I think was probably forgotten about in Survivor history. Again, she was supposedly in the running for Heroes vs. Villains, got the last second, though again, this is 8 seasons later. I don't know if she would really be in consideration at this point, but she is a cop, which again fits in line with obviously like Sarah and Tony, who were on the actual seasons, though she didn't end up making it on. Next up for Panama, and there were a few considerations for Panama. Shane Powers is someone I greatly considered, though the question is, where does he land? He doesn't really fit into any of the three, so that was kind of an issue there. Danielle is a captain of sports, so I very much considered her for the Brawn Tribe, though she didn't make it on. But I did add 2 people from Panama onto this cast. First up being Suri for the Brains Tribe, where again, like for me, it was Suri or Eliza. I technically wanted Eliza more on this cast. I think Eliza fits into the Brain moniker more than Suri, though again, Suri helps with diversity, and also, again, still not a bad pick, obviously. Suri is obviously one of the smartest players to ever play the game, and has this overall story of getting herself off the couch, which I think leans into the brain side of things as well. So again, I felt like it was good enough here to land Suri on this tribe. Also, the other person's a much more obvious pick here for the Brawn Tribe. I obviously had Terry Dietz. Now, again, I think the problem with Terry Dietz on a lot of these returning seasons is that he's always fighting for the same spot as someone like a Tom. However, Tom would have clearly turned a season like this down, and considering his later appearance at Second Chance, I feel like Terry was an obvious pick here. Obviously, one of the best physical competitors in the history of the show, won 5 immunity challenges in a row, made it to the very end of the season almost solely due to physical challenges. So again, I think he's a very solid pick here. Next up for Cook Islands, I considered a few people here. Now, Candace would have been in consideration for the Brains Tribe, though again, she had just come back for Blood vs. Water, so I decided to leave her off. Henner is someone I considered for the Brains Tribe, though again, also had just come off of Philippines, so I think that would have left him off. Parvati is someone that would have been on the Beauty Tribe, though I don't think she would have said yes. So that we're left with 2 people that I did put on. First up, for the Brains Tribe, I did put Yul. Now again, this one was a bit of a question mark to me in the fact that I don't know if Yul would have said yes at this point in Survivor history, because that for me, essentially like Yul and Savage were fighting for the same spot here. Well, them and also someone else we'll talk about later, but essentially it was this like final spot for the guy on the Brains Tribe. However, I decided to go with Yul mainly because, again, diversity. I do feel like the overall diversity of this cast is very lacking, and adding someone like Yul definitely helps out in that factor. But also beyond that, I think it adds an interesting dynamic with Yul, considering the other person I put on this cast, where on the Beauty Tribe, I did put on Ozzy. Now again, Ozzy was a bit of a question mark for me in terms of where do I put him. I think he was always going to be on this cast. It was more so, is he Brawn or Beauty? However, when looking at these groupings, I decided to go with Beauty just because I do feel like Brawn is already kind of too strong. So I feel like adding Ozzy to Beauty kind of equals things out a bit there. But again, having Yul and Ozzy on the same season again would have been very interesting. So again, he made it on here. Next up for Fiji, no one really was in true consideration here. I mean, Earl would have been consideration for Brains, though I don't think would have made it on anyway. Though I don't think he would have said yes, and even beyond that, I don't think would have made it on anyway. But with that, we move on to Survivor China, where here I had a few considerations. Obviously, Todd would have been a great consideration for the Brain Tribe, though he didn't make the cut. Also, again, I don't know if production would have wanted him. Someone like Amanda was in consideration for Beauty, though I don't think she would have said yes. PG, I very much considered really for either Brains or Beauty. Probably Brains makes more sense just due to her more nerdy persona outside the show, but even beyond that is still someone involved in creating jewelry and has a more like creative occupation, which I feel like they typically like to associate to the Beauty Tribe. But either way, didn't make it on. The person from Survivor China I did put on is going back to the Brawn Tribe. I did put on James, and James for me was someone that I didn't really want to have on here. I did feel like having James, especially on the Brawn Tribe, would have been a bit too overpowered. However, again, it comes back to diversity. I do feel like the diversity of this cast is lacking, and I do feel like James obviously helps with that. So again, for me, it was between James and Rupert. However, I did go James due to that factor, though really both of them do add an interesting dynamic here, considering the fact that Stephanie is also on this tribe, where James and Stephanie obviously had this very big rivalry on Heroes vs. Villains, so that could have been interesting to see. Though to be fair, again, also with Rupert there, it would have been kind of a similar thing. But either way, like I think James is a solid enough pick here. Definitely one that very much embodies the Brawn aspect of this cast. Again, he made it on. Next, moving on to Micronesia. And again, Eric had already come back, so he's not going to be in consideration. So I decided that there's only one true consideration here, and that person did make the cast, and that person is Natalie Bolton. Now, the question here is, what tribe is Natalie Bolton on? And my initial instinct was to put her on Beauty, though with how everything ended up playing out here, I did actually end up landing her on Brawn, which might not make sense initially, considering she wasn't particularly good at challenges, though her occupation, at least at the time of Survivor Micronesia, was personal trainer, where I felt like, that's good enough. Why not? Put her on the Brawn Tribe. I mean, she does feel like a bit of an outlier there, though again, I still felt like she was someone I did want to have on the cast here. Next up, for Survivor Gabon, and again, at this point, Randy, Corinne, and Sugar had already been back. I don't think either of them would have been in consideration here. But the true consideration for me would have been Kenny, who I very much would have wanted on the Brains Tribe, though again, with only 3 male Brain slots here, I did feel like it was tough to really land him here. So again, he didn't make it on. Next up for Tocantins, and there were a few considerations here. I mean, Taj would have been someone that I would have wanted to try to fit in here, though really wouldn't have known which one she would have went with, and even beyond that, did not want to come back. Kind of similar thing with Coach as well. Tyson had just won Blood vs. Water, so I don't think he would have come back right away. At that point, I did consider someone like JT for the Brawn Tribe, did not put him on. Aaron would have been consideration for the Beauty Tribe, that didn't put her on. The person I did put on ends up being on the Brains Tribe. That person is obviously Stephen Fishback, who, again, like I feel like at this point in Survivor history, Stephen Fishback would have been a very likely returnee, no matter what the theme would have been. I mean, obviously we do later see him return for Second Chance, but even beyond that, again, the main hurdle for him in terms of his returning chances seemed to be the fact that Cochran was someone that was taking his spot. But with Cochran now having already won and not wanting to come back, I do feel like this spot is very much open for Steven to take here. So, and with him kind of fitting into the overall Brain moniker, he definitely made it on the cast here. Next up, moving on to Samoa, and really no one was truly in consideration here. I mean, people like Laura Moret and Russ Swan had already come back. I don't know if they would have wanted Russell Hantz at this point. Shambo didn't want to come back. So really the only true consideration for me would have been Monica Padilla, who obviously does later come back in Second Chance. Probably would have been consideration for Beauty Tribe, though again, just did not make the cut. Next up, moving on to Nicaragua, and again, this is also a situation. Brenda has already come back. She would have been consideration for the Beauty Tribe. I did consider Holly for the Brawn Tribe, as she is a swim coach. However, she didn't make it on the cast. However, the person I did put on, the last guy from the Brains Tribe, ends up being Marty, who, again, had just gotten passed over in Caramoan. I do feel like for this season, he would have been at least a bit more in the running, especially considering the fact that, again, he very much fits into the Brains moniker, that kind of being his overall persona in his original season. And considering, again, archetype-wise, I do feel like he is different from the likes of a Yule or a Steven. I did feel like he kind of fit this cast pretty well here. Next up for Redemption Island, I actually have a decent amount of considerations here for Redemption Island. On the Brains Tribe, I consider David Murphy, who, while kind of forgotten about now, at the time of the season, he was looked at as a big character. Obviously, he didn't make the cut. On the Brawn Tribe, I considered the likes of a Ralph or a Mike. Mike probably being more likely to come back at this point. Mike supposedly being close to being on the original Caramoan and was also asked for Second Chance, though I think already by this point, I already have other people taking his slot. On the women's side of things, I would have considered Ashley, really for either the Brawn or Beauty Tribe. I mean, she is a former basketball player, but also a former pageant girl. She really fits into both, though she didn't make it on. I also consider Stephanie Valencia, who obviously was in the running later on in Second Chance. And probably for the Beauty Tribe, though she didn't make it on. But the person I did put on here might feel a little bit random considering all the people that I could have put on. That person is Natalie Tenorelli. And the reason for this is, one, again, I think she obviously perfectly fits the Beauty Tribe. But also, I do feel like production wanted to bring her back at this point, to where she obviously is in the running for Second Chance and doesn't end up getting voted in. However, I suspect that they wanted her to. Where out of the people in her archetype, I do feel like Natalie Tenorelli screams out to me as a person that they would have wanted back more so than someone like a Stephanie Valencia or even a Monica Padilla, even another person we'll be talking about in the next season. So again, I feel like Natalie kind of fit this cast the most to me. So again, I did put her on here. Next up for Survivor South Pacific, again, a couple of considerations. First up, the person I aforementioned, Michaela, who probably would have been more so in consideration for the Braun tribe, though really could have fit into either Braun or Beauty. But again, I didn't feel like she was super likely to make the cut here. Also consider Jim Rice, who I very much would have wanted on the Brains tribe, though for me, it was again between Jim and Marty, and I just felt like Marty fit the overall Brain theme a bit more, so I went with him. Though I did put someone else from this cast on the Brains tribe, and that person is Sophie Clark, who again, just kind of perfectly fits here. I mean, coming off as one of the more brainy winners of the show, one that clearly came off as very analytical and kind of cold in her gameplay approach. I think that would have been interesting to see back in this position, especially considering this would have been a decent landing spot for her. To where while this cast only has 2 winners, both of those winners are on this Brains tribe in her and Yule, and even beyond that has other allies like Steven and maybe other people we'll talk about. So I do feel like this is a pretty decent landing spot for Sophie. I thought she was a pretty decent pick here. Next up for One World, and I considered a couple people here. Now, obviously we had just seen Monica, Kat, and Colton return, where I mean really only Kat probably would have been consideration of those 3 people anyway, but none of them made it on. Considered Sabrina, though I didn't really know exactly what to do with her. She probably would have landed on the Brains tribe, though she just simply didn't make the cut. Or 2 people did make the cut, both on the Beauty tribe, both for kind of different reasons. I mean, the first one ends up being for more obvious reasons, that being Chelsea, who I remember even at the time people were talking about her as like one of the most attractive Survivor players ever. And again, like I think just in general, she kind of fits the Beauty tribe moniker here. Also probably helping out the tribe in terms of physicality, with her being decent in challenges. And overall, I just felt like she was a solid pick. However, the other person's a bit more of a question mark to me, where again, like he doesn't really stand out instantly as someone that should be on a Beauty tribe. But again, when looking at his occupation, he's the type of person that they typically put on a Beauty tribe, and that person is Troyzan, who again, at this point in Survivor history, I think they were very likely to bring back. He had been in the running for both Caramoan and Blood vs. Water and didn't make the cut. Later is in the running for Second Chance, only to not be voted in. Obviously, eventually comes back in Game Changers. I do think he's one of these people that was going to come back at some point. And I feel like this was a decent landing spot for him, especially considering how other people probably would have declined. Now, again, overall placement on the Beauty tribe is a bit questionable, though again, he is a photographer. He has a more artistic occupation, where again we see in future seasons that was kind of their excuse for someone like a Ty. Well, that and his inner beauty, to where I do feel like someone like Troyzan kind of fits into that moniker as well. Now, again, not entirely fully, though. I just feel like he's the type of person that would have been back at some point in this point in Survivor history, and I feel like the Beauty tribe, considering the archetypes of the other players around him, kind of makes the most sense here. Next up for Survivor Philippines, there were a few considerations here. I did consider someone like an Angie, who would have been very clearly on the Beauty tribe, and again, was in consideration for Second Chance, so again, didn't really make the cut for me. Abby Maria is someone I really wanted to fit onto this cast, though I just really didn't know where exactly to put her. I mean, she probably would have been on Beauty, though considering her rivalry with another person I did put on the cast, I did feel like leaving her off was kind of a necessity. Also, I did consider Malcolm, who would have been on the cast straight up on the Beauty tribe here had it not been for the fact that this would have been 3 seasons out of 4, to where we know that he turned down Blood vs. Water because he didn't want to do 3 seasons in a row, and I don't feel like the couple month difference between Blood vs. Water and Cagayan would have changed that much, to where again, I do think he would have turned it down. But the person I did go with here ends up being someone that was supposed to be on the original Blood vs. Water, and I do think this would have been an easy spot to bring her back, and that person is RC, who I pretty much had as a lock on the Brains tribe here, again being from a very white collar style job, and again being in this position where she was literally supposed to be on the last season of the show and was only not on due to her dad failing medical at the last second. So had that not happened, I think she would have had a very clear position on a returnee season, and I think to make up for that, they would have put her on the Brains tribe here, so again, was an easy pick. Next up for Caramoan, and there's not that much to talk about here. The only person I would have considered is Reynolds, though we know Reynolds turned down Blood vs. Water, so I do feel like he probably would have turned down Cagayan as well, though even then wouldn't have been a guarantee to make the cast, considering I feel like there's a certain other person from the next season that would have stolen his spot, though again, he at least would have been in the running. But with that, we do get to the latest season at this point, and that being Blood vs. Water, where this was kind of a tough spot here, where obviously with seasons that are taped back to back, they usually do like to take 1 or 2 people from those seasons and bring them back for the following season. However, with this cast in particular, I feel like there were just so many people from Blood vs. Water that could have come back that it made me question how many people should I allow back here. And initially the thought was to have 1 person on each tribe. I think that would have made a lot of sense. However, that kind of fell through. But either way, I did consider John Cody for the Brains tribe. I do think, while obviously you can argue he should be on the Brawn tribe or even debatably Beauty tribe, I do feel like the Brains tribe makes the most sense for him in the fact that he is this very physical player, but is also a doctor and very much fits into the Brains moniker, to where I think to help out physically, he would have been on the Brains tribe. And again, he was kind of close to making it on. It's just that, again, I feel like diversity-wise, it was tough to argue having him on over someone like a Yule, so he didn't make it on. Also, someone that I did end up having to cut ended up being Hayden, who probably would have been on the Beauty tribe, though again, debatably Brawn, considering he's a baseball player as well. Though again, I did end up cutting him, which feels weird considering this is immediately after Blood vs. Water, where he was extremely popular. But considering the fact that they do pick these other people that I did put on the cast over Hayden in future seasons, I decided to leave Hayden off here. But with that, the people I did put on here, first up on the Brawn tribe, I did end up putting on Brad Culpepper. Which, again, like, I think this is another one kind of like Troyzan, where it was just inevitable. Brad Culpepper was going to come back at some point. Obviously was in the running for second chance. Obviously ends up getting on Game Changers. I mean, it's very clear production very much like Brad Culpepper. And I do think he would have been a very easy person to just bring back the following season. And I think for the Brawn tribe, it would have made a lot of sense considering him being a former NFL player. Now, the other 2 people I ended up putting on both come from the Beauty tribe. Again, I said this earlier, that I feel like the Beauty tribe was probably the hardest one to fully piece together. This first one being kind of a question mark to me, though I did end up going with Vetus. And again, Vetus is another one that I think at this point in Survivor history, very clear that Vetus was going to come back at some point. They very clearly loved him in his overall story. Now, again, I think Beauty tribe is a bit questionable in the fact that he is this very brainy guy. He's a guy with this math degree, and through that I think you could argue he should be on the Brains tribe. Though again, I just feel like when trying to balance out these tribes, I feel like it makes more sense to put him on the Beauty tribe. I think considering his love of yoga and very zen attitude, I feel like that's something that they could lend to the more beauty side of things. So again, I did go with him on Beauty. And the final person I did put on is another one of these big locks after Blood vs. Water. However, I did question if she would want to play again back to back. Though considering she supposedly wasn't that fazed by the conditions the first time around, I did decide to go with Sierra Easton here. And again, Sierra is someone that I don't know if she would have wanted to play again right away. And I think she is probably the least likely of the 3 people I did put on the cast to play again right away, where I actually think probably someone like a John Cody is more likely to play again. But again, when looking at the contenders for this list and the overall breakdown, I did feel like Sierra being on here on the Beauty tribe made sense. And like technically, if this was the modern day, I think I would actually put Sierra on the Brains tribe, obviously being this more cutthroat player, this very aggressive player. But I think at this point in Survivor history, immediately after Blood vs. Water, I don't think that reputation was as strong. I think mixing that in with the fact that I believe at this point she was a cosmetology student, which again kind of leans more so towards the beauty side of things, I did end up going with Beauty for her. But there we go. I mean, that is my recasting of Survivor Cagayan if it was All-Stars. So the tribes I have here on the Brains tribe, I do have Sari Fields, Marty Piombo, RC Santamore, Sophie Clark, Stephen Fishback, and Yul Kwon. On the Brawn tribe, I have Brad Culpepper, James Clement, Natalie Bolton, Stephanie LaGrossa, Terry Dietz, and Twyla Tanner. And on the Beauty tribe, I do have Chelsea Meisner, Sierra Easton, Natalie Tenorelli, Ozzy Luce, Troyzan Robertson, and Vitas Bushkauskas. So that is my cast of All-Star Brains versus Brawn versus Beauty. Now moving forward, again, I would like to continue doing more videos in this nature, taking these newbie seasons and recasting them as All-Star seasons using their original themes, and also doing casting videos with those themes from a modern landscape as well. I think those are interesting ideas for down the road, but for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.